Hi, everyone. Welcome back to SELFWIFE. This is the podcast where I finally wake up in my late 30s and realize that my positive traits should benefit me also, as much as, or perhaps in most cases, more so than they benefit other people. Like, I should get to reap some of the benefits of the type of person that I am. And so I have wiped my whole life's slate clean to center myself and prioritize my own happiness. And this is the podcast where I bring you along with me for the ride. I am in a weird mood today. I think it's probably the fact that I just entered the luteal phase of my cycle, or as my Moody app, which I'm very newly exploring. But if you're a person who menstruates, I love this app. I usually use Flow, but this one's better. And it doesn't just show you when you're ovulating or when you're PMSing or when you're bleeding. It shows you every stage that you're in and names all the stages, which there's another term for the luteal phase called the shift phase. I didn't know that. I didn't know until, 8 years ago, maybe well into my adulthood, that the period was only 3 to 7 days of a cycle that's always happening. Hence, one of the reasons that I advocate for and make so much work about how we need to educate people about their bodies in school. I thought if I'm bleeding, that's the only time of month that I have the right to feel tired or irritable or have cramps or have cravings. But that's the end of your cycle, and you're always in a phase of your cycle, and there are 4 phases, and they all impact you tremendously and in different ways. I've been aware of this for, I would say, the better part of 10 years, but I haven't had an app that has broken it down in the way that the Moody app has. I did like a 7-day free trial. And then I think it's like $25 a year. It's great. Highly recommend if you're a person who menstruates. I now, when I wake up and I'm like, ugh, I don't feel like doing anything, instead of like, oh no, am I having another really bad depression spell? Or like, well, I guess that's it. My good days are over. I now, since downloading that app, I'm like, it's the phase of the cycle that I'm in. It's always the phase of the cycle that we're in, people who menstruate, because it's always impacting us. It is truly wild that most of the world, women included, only know about the blood portion of the cycle. Like, your menstrual cycle isn't you bleeding. That's the end of it. And it lasts for, 28 to like 32 days, depending on you and your hormones. And those date ranges change all the time too. But that's just at the top of my mind right now, because I do not feel like doing stuff today. And it makes sense according to my cycle. I love learning things about myself. As you know, that's my whole thing, especially right now. And so I'll open by just saying I feel blah. Another reason, though, that I'm sure I feel this way is because I have been doing research and conversation, RNC, just made that up, about Dr. Dobson, about Ruby Franke, about Jody Hildebrandt, about my childhood church, and about some of the destructive relationships I've been in for the past few weeks. And on one hand, and I talked about this last week, on one hand, it's enlightening and feels empowering. And I talk to other people who have survived James Dobson's teachings or parents who adopted them. And I'm inspired knowing that there are so many of us, and that so many of us have gotten away and see it so clearly now. And also, it's just heavy, having to scroll back through messages, having to uncover old memories, having to, wow, the camera just paused. I may have shifted in the frame because I had to turn the camera around. Anyway, it brings up a lot, and it just kind of makes me low energy. And especially because my life is all about solitude right now, the type of information I'm taking in every day, it just makes me feel a little bit less motivated, which is wild because I'm also more motivated right now to explore this topic than I have been since I made Who's Your Teacher. The way that people are coming together. I just heard from another person today who emailed me. She found me on TikTok. I had a wonderful conversation with a man named Jeffrey Sparks who lives in Indianapolis, someone else who found me on TikTok because of the Dobson posts. Her name's Kayla. She connected me with him. He started the Heartland Film Festival. He also started an incredible organization to teach young people screenwriting. That's called the New Harmony Project. You can look both of these up. Wonderful, really inspiring guy. And he just wanted to see if he could connect me with some other like-minded people. He's a like-minded person. He's the stepfather of a woman who went through the same stuff as she was growing up in childhood. I've had a couple more huge clarifying realizations about two things that happened to me. And again, it's like, if you've gone through like the excavation process of healing, where you have to really go back and reopen those memories so that you can process them in a new way, with a new lens or with a new headspace or with some clarity or compassion or grace newly applied to something that has like really harmed you retroactively, you know how hard it is, how confronting it is, how much it brings up in you, but also, you know, if you've done it, how life-changing it is. I am certain that I would be dead right now if I didn't get actively into healing in my 20s. I'm saying that just so honestly. Healing, especially if you had an abusive childhood, if you were raised in purity culture, if you were raised in Gwen Shamblin's eating disorder cult, if you were raised by narcissists, if you were raised by people with really severe unchecked mental illness, religious extremism, if you've been in abusive relationships with people who have taken you for granted, who have lied to you, who have harmed your body irreparably, who have abused you, who have gaslit you, like, you have to be healing. I've said it before. I'll never stop saying it. You have to be seeking out some form of healing. And I don't know what kind of healing that is for you. I still am finding out what my favorite forms of healing are. I'm trying so many of them. I will forever, but it's essential to you finding peace in this life that you're reading about these things, talking to professionals about these things when you can, Googling healing modalities and picking one and figuring out how to make it part of your life. I find Reiki practitioners on TikTok live every single day. I've said this before. I would say 2 to 3 times a day, I have TikTok live with a Reiki practitioner happening on my phone. And I can tell for me which practitioners are really skilled and powerful, and I actually feel the energy moving through my body, and it feels like meditation to me. And then I find ones that don't do anything for me, but they're free. That's a healing practice that I am able to embody every single day. I've been really into grounding for the past year. I've talked about it. Wherever I am, I find the best place to ground. Here, it's a rock patio. I can also walk to grass, which I have done a couple times. But that's so healthy for you. It's so good for your body to sit on the earth with your skin and let the earth neutralize the charges in your body, bring you back down to earth in a very literal sense. I just want to advocate, like, I wouldn't be able to talk about these things if it weren't for the healing that I've done, if it weren't for the healing that I know is available to me, if it weren't for the fact that I know now that when I get dysregulated and I get overwhelmed, I'm in a safe space so I can bring myself back down. I've removed all of the people in my life who dysregulate me for their own pleasure and joy. And a thought I had the other day, as I've been spending so much time in solitude and loving it and really thriving, was I now have created the safe environment for me to grow up in. I didn't have that growing up. I had to grow up in very specific ways and very unfair ways. Some of the ways you've seen depicted in the Ruby Frankie ordeal, treating toddlers, like 5-year-olds, like adults, like, oh, you forgot your lunch. Guess you're going to have to starve. You better think about that next time. When like they're 5, they can't think about that next time. That's not where they're at developmentally. I was raised in one of those types of households. So I now in the space I've created for myself, am allowing myself to grow into who I am and to feel what I'm feeling and to express what I'm feeling. And it's also, as I have probably talked about almost every week, it's hard and it's draining. So I will be dipping back in and out. Thanks for listening to last week's episode. I just needed to talk about my dad. I am going to touch on some new things that I've learned about Dobson this week. And I also am going to talk a little bit about Russell Brand. Let's start with Dobson. So last week I mentioned Jody Hildebrandt's niece's podcast episode. It's on a podcast called Mormon Stories. If you haven't seen it, what she really details is how people in this leadership position, and I'm equating a Jody Hildebrandt figure with a James Dobson figure, a white evangelical Christian nationalist. Dobson has been linked to Nazism and eugenics. Just discovered that. Who place themselves in a position of authority, who sometimes get the proper schooling. You know, as far as I know, he's a real doctor. As far as I know, Jody Hildebrandt went to school to be a therapist. But they are deeply sadistic people on the inside. But they're calling everything that they're doing love, honor, in service of the Lord. And one thing about Christians today is if you call something Christian or if you call something in the service of the Lord, you can get away with anything. You can get away with child abuse. You can get away with tying your kids up and locking them in a panic room. You can get away with making your niece sleep out in the snow because you want to make her so uncomfortable that the sin comes out. You can get away with running our country into the ground, raping women, openly hating marginalized communities, and just saying you're not racist. As long as you say you're a Christian and you're doing things for the glory and honor of the Lord, Christians don't hear beyond that to think critically. One thing I've learned after spending years deconstructing fundamentalist Christianity, which was the Christianity I was raised in, very strict biblical literalist fundamentalism. It is our job to spread the good news. This is the one true religion and everyone else is going to hell. And be careful because they're trying to drag you to hell with them. That type of mentality that takes a lot of deconstruction. Also, I was an only child and I wasn't allowed out of the house. I was so indoctrinated. All of my content was heavily monitored. I had no access to outside information, literally. And if my mom would find out that I was reading something secular, I would get in so much trouble. I've told this story before, but she caught me reading I don't know, it must have been like Teen Bop, right? Remember those? Teen Beat, Tiger Beat, Bop magazine. And she took that as satanic material that I'd brought into the house. And she made me go up in front of our church congregation and apologize for that dirty, rotten sin. I was maybe 10. This is humiliating behavior where these people are basically James Dobson, who opens his parenting book with an anecdote about beating his dog into submission. These people, and Jody Hildebrandt, who, is torturing her niece and saying she's just trying to force all the sin out. It's a mind fuck because as a child, you don't know better. And you're being told that this person is saving your soul by torturing you here. And you're also constantly being reminded that this life is temporary, but what they're doing is going to secure your eternity in heaven. It's how do you argue your way out of that? As a kid, you're just like, oh, okay, it sounds like you know about all of eternity and what needs to be done. And you don't have any rights because you're a child. These people, though, it's easy for psychopaths to slip really easily into those positions. Dobson's books are still on the way. Today's the 19th. I think the 22nd and the 25th are when they're coming. I ordered The Strong-Willed Child. I ordered a book called Dare to Discipline. And then I ordered a Strong-Willed Child workbook. And I ordered the older editions. I wanted to see the ones that my mom was reading. I don't want to see the updates because I think they've gotten a little bit wise to what people don't like. And so I will go ahead and armchair diagnose him once I read them. But Jody's niece referred to her as a psychopath. And as an adult now, coming from such a militant household where every single sigh was heavily criticized, I was in trouble for asking questions. I was in trouble for not being excited enough. I was in trouble for not saying yes, ma'am, right away. I was just constantly in trouble for being alive, seemingly. And also, I was a communicative kid, so I was asking questions like, I don't understand, like, what I could possibly do to make you happier. Like, I feel like I'm a good kid. Like, I'm like expressing things like that. I remember saying to my mom, I remember saying, because whenever I would let her down, she would look at me and she'd say, "What is the matter with you?" As if I was, and she would say it with disgust, as if I was so broken and rotten. And I remember getting to an age where I finally said, you know what? Nothing's the matter with me. And I don't like it when you imply that just because you disagree with something that I'm doing. And it makes me feel like you see me as broken when really it's just that I let you down in some new way. I'd really appreciate it if you didn't say that to me anymore. Like, I got to the age where I was able to articulate things like that. Obviously, it doesn't help. These people are not grounded in logic. Nothing you say ever works. They always win. They always shift the goalpost. They always make you lose. They are in complete control. People like this who use religion as an excuse to discipline their kids into submission so that the kids are afraid to ever even ask a follow-up question, you are disabling your kids and you're setting them up for a lifetime of abuse. They will have to work on knowing that they deserve even common decency and respect. I've had to do so much work getting from the daily punitive, demeaning treatment that I dealt with until I was like 21, 22 years old, to get from that to a place where everyone in my life just shows me basic decency. That has been so much work because Dobson and his teachings, Hildebrandt and her teachings, set children who are being indoctrinated by those teachings up for failure forever. And they have to do so much work to pull their way out, and some never will. It is a recipe for destruction. And I am appalled that I'm appalled learning that such a specific form of abuse was so widespread because this white dude is convincing adults that it's okay, especially because, again, I was a special ed teacher. I worked with the most obstinate kids in the district, kids who were diagnosed with oppositional defiance disorder, kids who were going to be expelled, but they were sent to me as a last resort. Those were the kids that I was best with. Do you think there was ever a day when I would tell their parents that they should use physical force? It's not, first of all, it doesn't work. And it's honestly foolish. It is the mark of a parent who doesn't know what the fuck they're doing and who's terrified of being out of control. And so you don't know tools. You don't know how to communicate with your kid. You don't know how to encourage better behavior. You don't know appropriate discipline. So you just hit them. That's because you're weak and you have some learning to do. And you're doing a job raising a kid that you're not qualified for. And the fact that there's doctors who say that you need to use pain in order to manipulate your kids. Well, of course, he's not going to use the word manipulate. He only uses the word manipulate when he's talking about children expressing emotions, which are, of course, all manipulative. One thing I've learned about narcissists, and again, I have no problem doing an armchair diagnosis. Like I said before, these labels are for victims to understand what they've gone through. Perpetrators are not going to go get help and get labels for the most part. So I have no problem diagnosing him. I'll need to read the books. But from what I understand, this person couldn't care less about the feelings of another person, even when those feelings are of, their young child. I feel pretty confident calling something like that narcissism. But the fact that these people who really don't care about what their child's needs are, their child expressing themselves as a full human being is a burden on them. So much so that they've resorted to just beatings and then decided to sell beatings to other parents under the umbrella of like, this is what the Lord wants, to me it is so sinister. It's like, it's so dark. You're being told that it's for God and the Lord, and that they're trying to make you perfect in the eyes of the Lord, and that your parents are perfect in the eyes of the Lord, and that they have a direct line to the Lord, and the Lord is telling them to do this, and you're totally taught that it's love. It's just a different type of shit to unpack. And it, as you know, colors your relationships with people forever. Abuse in the name of love is like, abuse plus gaslighting. So really making the child believe that like they are asking for this, they deserve it, and that the parent is always right and they're always wrong. Like, that's a really good way to ensure that your kid will suffer forever in every type of relationship that they're in and every setting that they're in, unless they are fiercely diligent about healing. And even when they are, like I am, they're still going to have a really hard time, because that's the blueprint you've given them, is one of abuse. I learned that two things that I experienced growing up came directly from Dobson. One, I told this story on TikTok. I'll go ahead and tell it right now in a little more detail. I was suicidal as a teenager. That's the first time I remember expressing it to my mom. I honestly probably wanted to die younger than that. My mom would tell me all the time about praying that she was allowed to die in her sleep and stuff. Like, I was afraid my dad was going to commit suicide. I wrote about that in my diary when I was like 8. Suicide, the concept of it was a huge topic of conversation in my life via, honestly, mostly my mom. She would talk about wanting to die. She would talk about all the time she thought my dad was going to kill her. She would talk about our safety. And then she would plant all these ideas in my mind about my dad being this evil person. And I was convinced that he was getting remarried for the 3rd time. And I was convinced, is what I wrote in my diary, that if it didn't work out, he would kill himself. And that was a concern of mine, before I'd even reached 10 years old. So it was a concept that was it was a part of my consciousness because of my mom for the most part. And then, all access to joy was taken from me and hyper controlled, and love was very subjective, and I wasn't allowed to ever do anything that I was interested in. I was constantly in trouble, and I could never please her, and all these things. And obviously it ate away at my will to live. Like, I honestly could not figure out, until I started working with kids, I had no idea why anyone would want to be alive. Like, I was like, what is the fucking point of this shit? Just every day you're like fucking up and repenting and being in trouble, and you can never do well. And joy isn't on the table. It's all about reverence to the Lord, and you're reading the Bible, and movies off limits, music off limits, parties off limits, people off limits, going to the mall off limits. Like, it was a miserable, dreary life, and it was just getting worse as I was getting older. And I started to express that to my mom. And, we didn't have a good relationship. She was not my friend. She was not a safe person to talk to about anything. If I ever talked to her about something, she would punish me, because it was, if I was having an issue with somebody at school, she'd be like, well, what did you do to create that issue? You probably haven't done enough to make it right. Or if I was interested in a boy, she would like grill me about like, have you done anything sexual with him? Kissing is lustful too. Like, I wasn't allowed to talk to her about anything, because it would always lead to like her questioning me to see how she could punish me for some sin that I was definitely committing, which led to my sadness. So I just never got life advice. I never was comforted. I never got answers. When I first asked, like, why do I have to have such bad cramps? She said, because Eve sinned and now all women have to suffer, And so there were a couple times, or I remember one time in an argument where she was really tearing me apart. She used to follow me from room to room. She also really loves to taunt. And when I would get upset about stuff she was saying to me, she'd start taunting, and she'd go, so weird you think that I can impact your emotions. I'm not making you feel anyway. That's all you. Oh, you think it's me, huh? She'd be following me from room to room doing that. So At one point I was like, I want to die. Like, I hate life. I hate existence. You make me miserable. I wish I was dead. Like, I want to kill myself. And the very first time I expressed it, she was already not happy when I said that, because it was like in the middle of her berating me about some imperfection. And she got more mad and she said, "Oh, really? Wow. You think you can just say that to me, huh? All right, I'll show you. You'll be sorry. You'll be sorry. And I guarantee at the end of this week, you will never say that to me again." She had that little attitude. And what she did, instead of caring or worrying, she called my high school and she said that I was a suicide risk and that she was concerned about me. So what she needed was for a campus security, a security guard, to come into each and every one of my periods during the day. I think I had like 6 classes, high school, and have a sheet printed out with my name on it that they would ask the teacher who I was. The teacher would point to me. The police officer, security guard would come over, have me sign my name on a piece of paper, proving that I was still alive. And that happened every period for a week. And she did that to humiliate me out of ever saying that to her again. And she knew that it would lead to people being like, "What's that?" And that I would have to tell people. And, I came home from school and I was like, "That's so humiliating. And why are you doing this?" And she's like, "I told you you'd be sorry. Don't you ever say that to me again. You'll think about it next time. Did you ever threaten me with that again?" And it was just like, okay, I thought I was at my wit's end. I wasn't. This is worse. Obviously it made me want to die more, but I knew I was never going to be able to express that to her ever again. Anyway, that came from Dobson. Come to find out, Dobson teaches that anytime kids are showing extreme emotion, they are manipulating you. He also gives time limits for certain ages. Like if a young kid cries for more than 5 minutes, it's manipulation and you must start hurting them. Like he really advocates for using pain to stop them from manipulating you. If they are moping, they're manipulating you. If they're crying, they're manipulating you, and they must be punished until they learn to not manipulate. And when I learned that, I realized that's why she fucking did that, because she really believed that me expressing a very real desire, which was to no longer exist on this hell planet in her home. It was more evidence that I was just villainous, dishonest, disruptive, on a path to destruction, in the clutches of Satan. And anything I did was like, "You're in the clutches of Satan." And it was like, which obviously is going to push somebody to their breaking point when they can't do anything right, because every misstep, every mistake is seen as like a sin or sinful and something you must repent for, and something that the adult needs to humble you for. That came directly from Dobson. He teaches that. And it's like, again, does that make me feel better? Does that make me more fucking mad? It's a little bit of both, because now that I'm skilled to work with children, difficult children too. I wasn't a difficult child at all. I posted a text from somebody that went to our church and also has gotten out. She's known me my entire life. She was like, "Just for the record, in case you were wondering, you are not a strong-willed child at all." And it was nice to hear that, because I know that, especially after working hard or working with strong-willed children, like actually credentialed to do so. And it was my whole life for 12 years, worked with hundreds of them. I wasn't one of them, A, and B, none of the methods that were used on me work. They work even less for strong-willed children. For obedient children who want to serve, they just break them down, break their spirit, break their heart, break their soul, make them want to die. And I think for more obstinate kids, or for kids who there are a lot of reasons why a child might have a hard time responding well to direct commands. And in no way is beating them the answer. having them pick out a paddle that's shaped like a heart so that you can hit them with that. Someone messaged me and said that Dr. Dobson himself at a conference sold her parents a leather strap to beat her better with. It's so misguided. And yet he has guided so many people. To me, he's in a category like Trump. Very wealthy, white, evangelical. Well, Trump isn't even an evangelical, but using his power for evil, telling people God told him to do this, but really it's just abuse. It's really just destruction. Here's another terrible thing that happened that came directly from Dobson, come to find out. I even found text messages about this today. I had a cat since I was 15. Her name's Lola. She was always my cat. When I went away to go to school and teach full time, which was something I did simultaneously, I was in school full time and I was working full time before and after. I was working in the morning. I was working in the afternoon. I was going to school at night, all in working in schools and going to school to become a teacher. And I couldn't take my cat with me. I moved out of Apple Valley, moved to Rancho Cucamonga with the same woman that I referenced from my church who got out. Her name's Colleen. Just had a 4.5 hour FaceTime with her a couple days ago, partially about all of this, just also about both of us getting out of that and really like licking our wounds and constantly having to be like, wow, like unpacking more layers of it, right? So I move in with her and I'm not home enough to take care of my kitty. So I left her at my mom and stepdad's house. And this was in 2017 or 2018. So honestly, pretty recently. I got a call from her, my mom, and she said that Lola had forgotten her subordinate place in the family, and therefore my mom was going to have her killed. And I'm sorry, excuse me, what happened? Oh, well, my mom brought in a stray cat. Lola had lived alone with us, her whole life. So my mom brought in a stray cat. So Lola was very reasonably spooked about that. And Lola would, when the stray cat would come across her path, she would hiss, as cats do. And when she did that, my mom said that she was so offended that Lola would hiss at her. And clearly it signaled that Lola had forgotten that my mom was the master of the household and she made the decisions. And therefore, my mom could bring in a new cat whenever she wanted. And Lola needed to understand that. So because she was hissed at, she lunged toward Lola to try to grab her by the nape of the neck. And Lola bit her. And that was why my mom said she had to be put down. And I said I countered all of these things with logic. And she heard none of it. And she said, no, Lola has forgotten her place. I am the master and she is the subordinate. And she doesn't understand that. And she had the nerve to bite me, the master of her house who feeds her and keeps her safe every single day. She's lost her place. I'm putting her down. This new cat deserves to be in the house now. Lola's got to go. I had to get several family members involved. I had to get cousins on the line to talk her down over the course of a week, to reason with her, to explain the situation to her from a logical perspective and where she was in the wrong and where Lola was being a cat. And also what, anyway, that comes from Dobson. Straight from Dobson. That's the opening anecdote in the Strong-Willed Child book about beating the dog into submission. I read it. I found that and I read it in full even before I had the book in my hands. He tells his dog to go to bed and the dog whimpers and doesn't go to bed. And so he enters into, I believe he said it was like a 12-minute fight with the dog where he's just beating the dog harder and more and more and more. And the dog's running. And every time the dog runs or tries to growl, he hits him harder and harder and harder until he finally got him to go in the crate. I mean, he's telling the story like it's like a fun cartoon battle. And he's just beating the shit out of this dog. And then he's like, and then next time I told him to go in the crate, he went and never gave me that problem again. And that's what you need to do to children. That is why my mom said that about Lola losing her place and needing to teach her. And it wasn't even, I think maybe because Lola isn't a dog, so you can't beat a dog into submission. My mom's brain went to like, I guess she's got to die. And if I didn't intervene with several support systems, she would have had her killed. Now, people like Ruby Frankie, people like my mother, people who voted for Donald Trump, like these are people who they've been so brainwashed and indoctrinated and manipulated by scripture their whole lives. And basically they're also taught to cut off, their access to other information and stuff. And so, by 2018, I mean, she was a lost cause long ago, but like it's done for these people. These ideas that Dobson ingrained into an entire nation of parents they're too deep, especially by now. And I want to talk to even more parents who were able to see the light and who like bought into it for a while and then saw the light. Those people, that takes so much bravery. I have asked my mom questions that sort of derail her belief system. And I watch her kind of power down to avoid the question, because if she answers one of them, it's such Christianity, fundamentalist Christianity is so, it's very precarious. It's built on a few big deceptions that you're not allowed to ask questions about. And if you do ask like a sort of dismantling question, they're just like, they can't go there. They'll go, oh, I won't answer that question. Or, like if you ask like, okay, so if, Christians don't believe in the Big Bang because the world can't come from nothing, but you say God has existed for all time and nobody created him. So that right there is saying that you believe that things can exist from nothing. But they won't engage with you if you ask a logical question like that. It's always a deflection. That's just one example of so many. I don't argue with Christians anymore. Well, a thought I had yesterday is like the idea that I never have to argue with my mom again. It makes me the happiest I've ever been. The idea that the awareness that I don't ever have to defend myself to an illogical person again makes me thrilled. The idea that I have cut ties with somebody who sees me as less than because, well, now it's because I no longer share the same beliefs as her. But before it was, I don't know, I guess because Dobson was teaching her that I was less than. I don't know how much credit to apply to each of the adults here, right? Like my mom was an adult when she was reading Dobson. I was an adult when I was in school about the same time, about the same age she was when she was reading Dobson and harming me because of his teachings. I was in school when I reached that age, learning how to help kids behave better if that needed to happen. And so I can't, as an adult now, I could never, ever, ever justify reading a book like that and thinking, yeah, this sounds right. Especially not with a kid like I was. I was just like wide-eyed and curious and like wanted to have a good time. I was like a chill kid who asked questions and was interested in like honesty and people and their feelings and stuff. Like I honestly, if I had a kid, I would love to have me. So I do put the blame on her for reading that book and not going, this isn't what my daughter needs, like my dad did. Like I told this story before, he spanked me one time, came back into the room same night, apologized to me. This was when I was 5 or younger, said, I will never do that to you again. You don't need it. And he never did. He tried it because he was forced to, coerced, I guess, by my mom. He immediately was like, that's not for her. I'm not doing that anymore. That felt bad. And he stopped. He never did it again. People like that are heroes. And so I do resent my mom for reading that book and going, yeah, this is right. But also she had been brainwashed by this new belief system because she's born again, that it was here to solve all of her problems. And I think not being in complete control at all times was a problem for her. Hyper-controlling individual. Dobson, hyper-controlling individual. Jody Hildebrandt, hyper-controlling individual. These are adults who are afraid of not being in control. And I also get that fear. I'm not going to be like, well, I don't know what it would be like to be, raising a kid. I actually do. I know a shit ton about kids. They have been my whole life up until recently. I know what it's like to feel out of control of a classroom too. Every teacher does. There are days when shit happens and you've tried your best and it's just a failure of a day and you just can't get shit done. The kids aren't listening. This one's having a tantrum. This one puked. There are days, especially too, like if you're substituting or if it's the first fucking week or 2 weeks, like, and you feel like you don't have a control of the classroom, which can absolutely happen, especially for teachers with students with special needs, when like almost all of my students have behavior issues in their IEPs, and like that's part of the job. Like, I know what it's like to feel out of control. Never once ever have I responded to that feeling with trying to strike fear in the hearts of children so that I can feel more in control. Ever. I wasn't that type of teacher. Never would be, never will be. Couldn't see it. Have never used fear, criticism. Obviously, corporal punishment isn't part of the school system, but if it were, I wouldn't have used it. I've never used dominance or force like that. It doesn't work. It's not me. It really builds a foundation of distrust between you and the kids, which is the opposite of what you need to do if you want to educate and help a child, make them trust you, build a relationship. They literally have to like you to learn from you. That relationship is number one, and it's paramount. It's foundational. And if you build that relationship, that foundational relationship of trust and mutual respect, a lot of adults don't think kids deserve respect. Why do you think they grow up to not respect people? Respect kids. Talk to them like they're kids. Don't talk down to them. They're not fucking dumb. They're just in their developmental stage, just like you fucking were, like everybody's going to be. We move through the stages. Like, I get so worked up. Because it's like the more educated I am, the less compassionate I'm able to be, because I'm like, no, you had opportunities to know better. But then it's like, well, maybe she didn't have opportunities to know better. I mean, she didn't go to school, she doesn't know anything about raising kids other than what she read from Dobson, which is all the wrong shit. So I don't know. All right. Updates on the Ruby Frankie, Jody Hildebrandt case is basically postponed. We don't have any updates yet. The kids are still being kept separate. Kevin, the ex-husband, is speaking a little bit through his lawyer. His lawyer is saying he's like just now realizing how bad Jody was for the marriage. Oh, Jody had convinced him to move out of the house for 6 full months and not talk to anyone, including the kids, and block all their numbers and not respond. And he was doing it because they were all like under Jody's rule. Man, I'm still trying to parse out, like, do I feel, a lot of people are saying Ruby was like kind of an okay mother before Jody. Wow, I wonder if I'd be able to say it. I mean, I don't know when my mom adopted Dobson. I don't know when it started, All I have, most of the memories from my childhood are in the first 5 years, because that's when he was in the house, and that's what I have home videos of. And it seems sweet. And then he left and it was not sweet anymore, but I don't know when, I was a kid, so I don't know when it all started. I don't know what type of mother she would have been if it weren't for Dobson. Unfortunately, I'm not able to talk to her about any of this stuff because it's just, fool's errand. I use that term a lot. It applies to a lot of my life. Talking to her about this, trying to ask her, like, when did you start reading these books? And like, what do you think it would have been like if you didn't? Like, I can't do that. It's not safe to open those lines of communication. But that's why I am eager to talk to more people. If you're listening to this, if you've seen my TikTok, if you want to talk about Dobson, if you have personal stories, please reach out. I want to talk to you. I'm still lining up interviews, okay? I want to have you as a guest on this show. I want to talk to you about your experience. Criteria is parents raised you according to Dare to Discipline or The Strong-Willed Child, and you have seen the light. And that's, I want to just collect experiences and knowledge at this point. I'm going to talk more about Russell Brand on Patreon and on TikTok because I have a lot to say. But I just want to share one thing, which is that I wrote in 2015 a bullet pointed article on my personal blog at the time about Russell Brand's narcissism, which was on display in one specific interview I had chosen, where he was being interviewed by a woman for Vice. I think her name was Caroline. I forget her last name right now. I'm sorry. I really liked her. She was a great Vice correspondent, and she hosted a fashion docuseries on there. She interviewed him, and he was just such a arrogant asshole, but it was subtle, and it was couched in his vocabulary, and it was couched with cheeky little Russell Brand-isms, you know? And I saw it all so clearly, and it was icky, and I wrote a minute-to-minute breakdown of like the undertones of what he was saying and what he meant and how he meant to diminish her and how he meant to derail her, how he meant to put her down, how he meant to neg her. And that article, or the blog I wrote, attracted a psychopathic, someone who turned out to be a psychopath and a serial rapist and serial abuser of women, attracted that person to me directly. He sent it to me. It was on my Facebook. He sent it to me and was like, I really like this. And then he would go back and read it often, because then he would say, hey, the link, it would be like days later, he'd be like, the link to your essay is down. Oh, okay. And I would go in and like fix it. And then he also told me later that essay was the first thing that made him interested in me, that drew him to me. And I've been trying to unpack that. I've had a new realization this week. Surprise, surprise. But it is that one thing I always say about abusive relationships is like, I always say, I repeat this a lot, like, oh, you don't know it when you're in it. But I've debunked that. And I actually found a lot of earlier messages with this person, where I very clearly laid out dozens of times over the course of our relationship exactly what I felt he was doing to me, how I felt it was manipulative, why this is a dangerous situation for me to be in. I mentioned my tendency to rationalize other people's behavior and to be too compassionate. I say all of these things to him within the first year, and it doesn't stop from then on as I'm looking back in our communication. I did know when I was in it. So I can't say that anymore. I'm not going to say that anymore, that you don't know when you're in it. There's got to be another way to put it. And I think it's that you know when you're in it, but for certain types of men, like Russell Brand and like the one I was acquainted with, there is enough distraction, positive input, stimulation, love, that they continually convince you to deprioritize all the abuse, all the stuff that really, really is harming you. And they're constantly filling you with tons of feedback, tons of attention, gifts, constant contact, adoration, compliments. And then they're hurting you irrevocably, like horribly. And they're crossing your boundaries. How many times I found in these old messages me saying several times throughout each year, I told you what my one boundary was and you crossed it. I don't know if I want to come over because last time you crossed my boundaries. I can't talk to you anymore. I'm just tired of having all my boundaries ignored. You know how many times I said that? I knew. And not only did I fucking know, I could spot men like that a mile away because I had just written a fucking blog post about Russell Brand and breaking down his narcissism second by second in a 10-minute interaction with a woman. I was so good at seeing that stuff. And I think the reason that drew this other one to me was because he saw me as a challenge. This girl gets it. She sees through men like me, come to find out. And I'm going to see if I can beat this level type thing. Like, ooh, a girl who I'm attracted to, who also sees through bombastic, rich, attention hungry, verbose, performative men, which is also what this one was. he saw it as a challenge. It drew him to me. And it was like my perception of men like that set a trap in which one of them made a beeline to me and convinced me of his worth and his innocence, and convinced me, of a lot of things that were not true for 3 years. And I don't have a way to wrap that up in a bow yet. It's wild to me that the first thing that drew him to me, by his own admission and by looking back on messages and remembering that that's how our first real conversation started. I had met this person one time on a project that somebody else was doing, very briefly, and then heard from him over a year later, like over and over again, until I agreed to hang out, and it kind of all started from there. But the reason he started to ask me to hang out and started to become so diligent about that, as I was seeing in messages today too, of like him being like, can you stop being so vague? And I remember that's because he was showing me hot and cold manipulative fuckboy tendencies right away. And I was protecting myself like crazy from the very beginning. I can no longer say you can't see it when you're in it. But it's that, for me, every time I saw it, I was maneuvered out of staying there in that awareness. It was with, very verbose apologies. Basically, one conclusion I can come to is men like Russell Brand, when those men also are good with words in any capacity, that is a 1-2 punch. That is really dangerous. Men like that can talk their way out of a hole, and also, especially for somebody like me who loves communication and loves learning and growing, in some of these messages I found sucker me. I'm like, in one of them I said, you're not bad, you just have an untrained mind, and that's totally fine. Let's train your mind. Like, men who are predatory, rich, are in the public eye, and who have a way with words are so dangerous. They're a lot harder to get away from. And I also am looking back and seeing like all of my attempts. Oh my God, my attempts started literally immediately to get away. And then every time I would be reeled back in, it was like I was in deeper. So the climbing out would be harder. And then the attempts to make me stay would be more intense. When I saw the news break of Russell Brand, I was like, fucking duh. I like said it out loud. Fucking duh. I've known this since 2015 when I wrote about it. Obviously I didn't call him a sexual predator. It wasn't about that at the time. It was about him just being a narcissist and negging this woman that he was clearly attracted to. And that awareness got me caught up with one. And the one I got caught up with did a lot of work to convince me he was different. And in a lot of ways he was. You can't say that somebody like Russell Brand isn't a unique type of person, someone like Russell Brand walks into the room as the life of the party. If he compliments you, it feels fantastic. He's got all the attention. Those men know what it's like when they give it all to you. They just know what they're doing. Russell Brand knows what he's doing. He's known, I guarantee he's known these allegations are coming. I don't even have to guarantee. He had his, edited response ready, before the documentary dropped, the same day. He has come up with this conspiracy theory. I think his transition into man bun yoga poses on his fucking YouTube channel, I think all of that whole spiritual transition was the beginning of covering this up, so that when it did come to light, he would be like, oh, it's actually because big pharma. he absolutely committed those assaults. I mean, if you watch the documentary, which I did, and then I also listened to another broadcast about it, I mean, he admitted the assaults to the women. He apologized to the women. They went to rape crisis centers afterwards. They told him, you aren't allowed to do that. He would say, oh, I know that was so selfish. I'm so sorry. I hope you forgive me. I know you're a lovely person, couching it with compliments. What I'll say about the women is that I'm grateful for them. I'm always so grateful when somebody speaks up because they are at least throwing a wrench in the abuse pattern for a while. As we know, a lot of rapists never see any punishment. Other people knowing about history of abuse is oftentimes all we're going to get. And so we take it. And a lot of times accountability just looks like that person's, tremendous flow of attention and success and money stops for a while because it's built on lies, and behind the scenes they are ruining women's lives with no second thought about it. And the most justice that a lot of us can hope for, unfortunately, is just other people being aware so that you're not part of the problem. So many people lied for the dude who harmed me. So many people lied for him for years. And I wasn't going to be another person who omitted the truth to help him dodge accountability for his rampant abuse. So my heart goes out to the women who are speaking up, and I hope that they feel some relief. And Russell's already lying about it. I hope. What do I hope? I hope it gives more people the courage to talk about what's been done to them. I'll end with Hildebrandt's niece. Hildebrandt's niece, Jessie Hildebrandt, they're non-binary. I keep misgendering them, and I apologize about that. So niece probably isn't the term. Let's see. Oh gosh, the non-binary word for niece is nibbling. I feel like we've got to do better than that. Anyway, Jessie Hildebrandt, they said as soon as an abuser abuses you, they've lost their right to privacy. It's your story now. And that's something that you kind of have to work on claiming for a long time. If you've been treated like a whole, if you've been sexually assaulted, if you've whatever the words are that you use, if you've been sexually assaulted, if you've been harassed, if you've had your boundaries crossed, if you've said no and they didn't say no, or they didn't stop, even if you can't say the word rape yet, like one of the women in Russell Brand documentary, they don't use their real names, but she said it was really hard for her to say that word. I get that. It's going to be, you're going to have your own time with it, and it takes as long as it takes. But one thing to remember is that it's your story now. And abusers lose their right to privacy. And by sharing your story, if you were treated this way, it just makes it harder for them to keep doing it. One thing I had to learn the hard way is with men like this, the trail of victims is long. And there are more than you will ever know about, unfortunately. And if you've been treated just like egregiously like an object, like your boundaries don't exist, like your needs don't exist, by a man who was, obtaining sexual pleasure from you all the while, other people knowing about that is a net positive, even though it's really hard. Really, really hard and re-traumatizing in new ways to talk about it. in my experience, the relief in knowing that I can no longer be used as a pawn in this person's evil game, and as part of his PR team, helping him lie to the world about who he really was, I could be the opposite of that and be a voice for truth and hopefully save some people. It can't save everybody. Men like this will always have supporters. You see, Rose McGowan is trying to support him. I can't even go into that in my mind. Donald Trump will always have supporters. Abusers will always have supporters. Okay. You're not going to change everyone's mind. You're going to tell people things that these men did to you behind the scenes. They're going to hear you. They're going to pretend that they are sorry for you, and they're still going to go and be friends with these men. Like there's a lot of pain that comes with it, but ultimately I think it's a net positive. It was for me. But it was also something that I never want to have to do again. And also something that I could do again. Meaning it's not the only person who has not accepted the word no from me in a sexual setting. Okay. I'm not going to be able to end this on a happy note, and that's okay. I know that this topic is heavy. If you've been through something similar and you're thinking of telling your story, just follow your intuition. I honestly was never going to be part of the story had I not learned what I learned about this person's past. I didn't understand. I didn't know who this person really was. Even when we broke up, I didn't fully know. And when I found out that it was like, wow, this shit goes deep and it goes back. And I have been a pawn and I have been lied to by so many people from day one so that this person can maintain their power. That's when I spoke up. I don't know what led these women to speak up against Russell, but fucking solidarity, good for you. He doesn't get to treat people like that and have no consequences and then also be looked up to as a guru. Fuck you, Russell Brand. I hope you suffer more than you've made your countless victims suffer. I know that there are so many more. All right, y'all. After you listen to this, go do something nice for yourself. Some of these topics, they're not always going to be uplifting, but I hope that I'm at least able to talk about them in a way that is palatable to you and that offers you some, I don't know, new glimpse of knowledge or peace or awareness or something. That's always my goal, is to talk about things truthfully and encourage you to do some healing work, do something that is for you and that helps you actually get better, be better, feel better. Self-care and like spoiling yourself and like giving yourself a treat, that's all fine. But I'm talking about like go outside and ground, meditate, find a body of water, eat more vegetables, take a lot of vitamins, like get some sun, do all the shit that everyone tells you to do. It's like we are live human creatures on this planet. We have to be interacting with the planet in the ways that fuel us. You can't just be inside all day looking at screens. And if you are and you feel bad, there is a correlation there. So after this episode, I'm going to jump in the pool because that's going to wash this topic off of me. But thank you for listening. I don't know what next week's episode holds yet. We'll see if it's more Dobson or if it's something else. Just really listening to myself because I'm a self-wife. I love it when you guys review the show. You can do so on Spotify, Apple. I think you can, you can review on Amazon Music as well. If you are listening to this and you do that, I will smile. And also, once again, as always, keep DMing me and telling me what you got from these episodes. It is my fuel. Thank you for listening. And if you're healing from any of the topics discussed today, I see you, I honor you, I encourage you. Keep going. There is peace available. It's just that for some people, myself included, it's harder to get to. You've got to remove a lot of bullshit to get there. And I'm getting there a little bit in my life. And I want you to know that you can get there too. You might not have to drastically change everything. You might not have to retire from the career you went to school for and cut off several family members and people that you used to call friends and sell your car and leave the city. You might not have to do that much. It might be a matter of like cutting one thing out of your life and feeling really great afterward. Okay. I appreciate you spending this time with me and listening, and I appreciate your feedback. And you can also watch the video version of this on my Patreon. I have a new story time up of the time I got fired for speaking up. It's a long story. I spoke up at this job once and I got fired in Los Angeles. So I told that story, and I've got some other ones coming. And also I'm including more of the theme song at the end of these episodes because it's just a fucking cool song. It has the Glockenspiel. So please enjoy the Glockenspiel in my outro. Bye everyone. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next week.